A Marriage Written in Scandal. Chapter 1. A Scandal in the Roses. Lady Phoebe Westcott had always suspected she would end in trouble over something that was not entirely her fault. Still, she had imagined something more dramatic than a headache and a handful of poor decisions at the Rutledge masquerade. The ballroom glittered with candles and jewels, masks and meaningless compliments. The air was thick with perfume and gossip. The violins shrieked cheerfully. Phoebe, in violet satin and a silver-trimmed mask, stood near a marble pillar, trying not to wince as her temples throbbed. "Do cheer up," her friend murmured. "You look as if you're about to be executed, not courted." "In my experience," Phoebe said, "the difference is mostly in the cost of the dress." Her friend laughed and drifted back toward the dancing. Phoebe swallowed another wave of pain and looked longingly at the open terrace doors. A few minutes of night air and quiet. That was all she wanted. She slipped through a gap in the crowd and headed for the terrace. Lady Phoebe. The voice stopped her. She knew it at once, low even, perpetually composed. She turned to find Colonel Henry Barrington, half in shadow near a column, mask discarded in his hand. Everyone knew of Colonel Barrington, war hero, younger son who had earned every inch of his rank. He was tall and straight-backed, with a scar along his jaw and a reputation for being as reliable as a well-drilled regiment and about as relaxed. "Colonel," she said, dipping a little curtsy, "you look very much as if you wish you were somewhere with fewer chandeliers." "A tent in the peninsula was seldom draught-free," he said, "but at least it lacked this much perfume." A corner of her mouth tugged. "Careful, Colonel Barrington. That almost sounded like a joke." "I am told I occasionally make them by accident," he replied gravely. Her headache eased a fraction. It was strange. She had never spoken to him for more than a few minutes before, always in crowded rooms, always with other people listening. Yet now his steady presence felt like a small patch of solid ground in the churning ballroom. "I am going to the terrace before my head explodes," she said. "If anyone asks, you may say I have run mad." "May I escort you?" he asked. "You do not look entirely steady on your feet." She opened her mouth to protest, then realized he was right. The floor did have an inconvenient tendency to drift. "Very well," she sighed. "But if my father accuses you of luring me into the shrubbery, I shall testify you warned me." "I appreciate your foresight," he said dryly. They stepped onto the terrace. The air was cool and blessedly fresh. Lanterns cast little pools of light. Beyond them, the garden stretched dark and quiet. Voices and laughter drifted faintly from the ballroom, but no longer pressed against her skull. Phoebe spotted a small stone alcove half hidden by climbing roses. "There," she said. "If I faint, I would prefer it to be onto a bench rather than a decorative urn." She sank onto the bench with a sigh of relief. The throbbing in her head dulled now that the noise was a mere hum. "You ought to sit," Henry said. "You're pale." "I am sitting," she pointed out, closing her eyes briefly. "You really are a colonel. You give instructions even when they are already being followed." "Occupational habit," he said. "Forgive me." She half smiled. "Tell me, Colonel, is there anything in life you do not approach like a battle plan?" He was quiet a moment. "Very little," he admitted. "It has seemed safer that way." She opened her eyes. He stood a few feet away, hands clasped behind his back, looking out into the garden as if he expected French artillery to appear through the rose bushes. Safer. She knew the word all too well. Everyone around her talked of propriety and safety as if they were the same thing. Sit properly, speak softly, never be alone with a gentleman, never give anyone reason to talk. Phoebe had never been good at never. "If you plan everything," she said, "where do you put the things you want?" He glanced at her. I beg your pardon. The things you want, she repeated. Not the things you should do or must do. The things you would choose if the world did not expect something else. He studied her a moment, as if the question itself were a foreign map. I do not often consider them, he said at last. Then that, she murmured, sounds very dull. Something like amusement flickered in his eyes. Lady Phoebe, I have had enough excitement to last 3 lifetimes. Dullness is underrated. She laughed, and her head punished her for it. The alcove swayed alarmingly. She pressed her fingers to her temple. Phoebe? His voice sharpened. You're ill. I am fine, she said automatically. The roses wobbled. The bench seemed to shift. She grabbed for something, anything, and her fingers closed around his gloved hand. The world tilted. He was suddenly closer, his other hand firm on her shoulder, lowering her back against the bench. Steady, he said. Breathe. She focused on his face, on the scar, the furrow between his brows, the calm in his gaze that somehow cut through the dizziness. I do not usually faint, she muttered, stung. I dislike giving people the satisfaction. Let us not start now, he said. Keep looking at me. She did. For a few strange heartbeats, the world narrowed to his dark eyes and the warmth of his hand around hers. I am quite all right, she said after a moment, the worst of the spinning easing. You may release me, lest someone see us and suffer a fit. His hand tightened just for a second before he began to withdraw. He did not have time. Phoebe. Her father's voice crashed into the alcove like cannon fire. She jerked her head toward the entrance, immediately regretted it as pain flared and froze. Viscount Westcott stood at the mouth of the alcove, crimson with fury. Behind him loomed Lady Rutledge, wide-eyed, and the Earl of Harbridge, lips pressed tight. Phoebe felt the blood drain from her face. She was on a bench. Colonel Barrington knelt beside her. Their hands were still linked. In any other context, it would have been farce. In this one, it was disaster. Papa, she began. Not another word, he snapped, his voice low and shaking. What do you imagine this looks like? It looks like a lady who nearly fainted, she said, anger flaring up through her fear. And a gentleman with the misfortune to have been nearby. At nearly midnight, her father said, in a secluded corner of the garden, unchaperoned. Lady Rutledge fluttered. Harbridge stared determinedly at the floor. Viscount Westcott, Henry said, rising to his feet. Lady Phoebe felt unwell. I brought her out for air and— Spare me, her father cut in. Do you truly imagine anyone will believe that? It happens to be true, Phoebe said through her teeth. Truth does not matter, her father said, and in that bitter statement she heard years of weary calculation. Appearances do, you know that. And you have been reckless from the moment you first set foot in a ballroom. There it was. The accusation always waiting just below the surface, too spirited, too outspoken, too much. Papa, nothing improper occurred, she said, fighting the burn behind her eyes. You know my character. Society knows only what it sees, he said harshly, and it sees my unmarried daughter alone with a man at midnight. A thin, stunned silence fell. Even Lady Rutledge's fan stilled. Phoebe's skin prickled. She could feel the future closing in, the whispers, the speculation, the invitations quietly withdrawn. A ruined girl had only so many paths: exile, scandalous liaison, or a man willing to shoulder the burden. She did not need to look at Colonel Barrington to know which path her father saw. You have compromised my daughter, her father said, each word clipped. There is only one remedy for that. Phoebe's stomach lurched. No, Papa! Viscount Westcott, Henry began. "You will marry her," her father said, overriding them both. The words fell like a judgment. Phoebe heard her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Marry, the Colonel, this man she barely knew, who smelled of starch and clean wool and duty. This man whose hand still felt warm where it had held hers. She risked a glance at him. He stood straight and still, jaw tight. She could not read his thoughts, only the flicker of conflict in his eyes. He could refuse, he could protest. He could leave her to whatever fate society had in store. Many men would. Instead, he looked at her father. "If my presence here has harmed Lady Phoebe," he said slowly, "I will make it right." Phoebe's heart clenched. "You will marry her," her father repeated. Henry's gaze flicked to her face. For one suspended moment, everything else dropped away. She saw her own shock reflected in his eyes, and something else, reluctant resolve. "If it is Lady Phoebe's wish," he said, voice even. Everyone turned to her. Her wish? How laughable. Her wishes had never counted more than the weight of a feather against the scales of propriety. Phoebe lifted her chin. If she must be pushed, she would at least walk with some scrap of dignity. "I will not cling to a man who does not want me," she said, looking directly at him. His expression changed very slightly. "I do not wish you ruined," he said quietly, "and I do not break my word." It was not romance. It was not poetry. It was, she thought numbly, better than cowardice. "Then we are agreed," she said. Her father exhaled, some of the fury ebbing into grim satisfaction. Lady Rutledge already looked as if she were composing the morning's version of events. Phoebe sat very still on the bench, fingers curled tightly around her skirts, while the men spoke of settlements and vicars and dates. Around her, the roses breathed their sweet, oblivious scent. Somewhere inside, violins played a waltz. In the space of a few minutes, her life had narrowed to a path she had not chosen. She had always thought herself immune to ruin. A few words, a few witnesses, and she was not. She would marry Colonel Henry Barrington. What she could not yet imagine was that the man who seemed made of duty would be the one to upend everything she thought she knew about her own heart. Chapter 2. A House of Order. 2 weeks later, Phoebe Westcott became Mrs. Henry Barrington in a chilly family chapel with more stone than flowers. The ceremony was small. Her father insisted on speed. Gossip moved quickly. There was no grand procession, no crowd of friends. Her mother dabbed at her eyes and said all the practical, loving things mothers said. Phoebe answered the clergyman's questions in a clear voice and watched her own hand as Henry slid a simple gold band onto her finger. He said, "I will," without hesitation, and she wondered if he ever did anything else. Afterward, there were awkward congratulations, a hasty meal, and then the carriage. Phoebe sat opposite her new husband as London's streets gave way to green fields, the city fading behind them. Her wedding gown was simple ivory, the veil folded on her lap. The motion of the carriage set the world in a slow, relentless rocking. Barrington House lay some 50 miles away, Henry had said. A modest estate by aristocratic standards, well run, efficient. She glanced up. He sat perfectly straight, hands loosely clasped, gaze on the passing countryside. No groom's glow, no particular gloom either. If he felt anything at all, he hid it well. "We should speak plainly," he said after a stretch of silence. She huffed a little laugh. That would be a novelty. He ignored that. "I know you did not wish for this marriage," he said. "Nor did I. We have, however, been forced into it by circumstance. I would like us at least to have an understanding." "Very well," she said. He cleared his throat. "You will be mistress of Barrington House. The staff will answer to you. Your comfort and security are my responsibility. I will see that you lack for nothing in material terms." Phoebe looked down at her hands, gold band, pale knuckles. And immaterial terms? She asked, attempting lightness she did not feel. There, he said carefully. I can promise respect, courtesy, freedom, within reason, to order your days as you like. What I will not do is impose myself where I am not wanted. Her head snapped up. Meaning? Meaning, he said, colour touching his cheekbones, that I will not enter your bedchamber without invitation. You may have your own rooms. If in time you wish for more, that will be your choice. Phoebe stared at him. In the world she inhabited, marriage was usually a matter of being claimed, not consulted. To be granted the choice startled her more than if he had declared an immediate wish for a dozen children. That is generous, she said, and meant it. Though I fear your idea of within reason may differ from mine. I dare say, he said dryly. She almost smiled. You truly mean to treat this as a campaign, don't you? I know no other way to proceed, he said. I can only make terms I know I can honour. Terms, campaigns, duty. She was marrying a soldier, not a poet. It was foolish to expect anything else. Then I too shall be honest, she said. I do not despise you, Colonel Henry. I resent the situation, not the man. I hope we may, at the very least, become allies. Something softened in his face. I should like that, he said quietly. The word like did peculiar things to her chest. The conversation faltered. They watched fields roll by, hedgerows sliding past like sentences she could not yet read. Barrington House, when they reached it, was exactly as she had imagined his home, symmetrical, solid, tidy. The stone facade was warm rather than grand, the lawns neat but not ostentatious. It was a house that looked as if it had never once considered misbehaving. As Phoebe stepped down from the carriage, she felt a strange vertigo. This was her home now, not Westcott House with its London clamour, but this quiet stretch of country, this front door, this man at her side. The butler greeted them with smooth efficiency. Welcome home, Colonel. Mrs. Barrington. That name again. Mrs. Barrington. She had worn it for only hours, and already it lay heavy and strange, like a borrowed cloak. A young woman hurried into the hall, nearly tripping over the carpet in her haste. "Henry!" she cried, then stopped short at the sight of Phoebe. "Oh!" Phoebe took in the round, open face, the fair hair tumbling from its pins. This, then, must be Charlotte. "Forgive me," the girl said, flushing. "I am supposed to be dignified. I am not very good at it. I am Charlotte. Your sister now, I suppose." Phoebe found herself smiling. "Fortunately, I never mastered dignity either. I am Phoebe, and I am very pleased to meet you." Charlotte beamed. "I've been dying of curiosity. That is, I was so sorry to hear of how it happened, but then I thought—" She shot a guilty look at Henry. "I am talking too much, aren't I?" "Unusually self-aware," Henry said dryly. "Mrs. Clark will show Phoebe to her chambers." Phoebe's chambers. The phrase slid through her like something half warm, half chilling. Her room overlooked a small lake. Blue damask hung on the walls. The bed was large, the linen faintly scented with lavender. It was pretty, peaceful, entirely unfamiliar. When she was alone, she stood by the window and watched Henry cross the stable yard below, hat under his arm, stride precise, speaking with the groom. She could not hear the words, only see the way he listened, the way men straightened when he approached. He belonged here already, ordered, necessary. She, by contrast, felt like something dropped from a great height, still waiting to land. "I am a colonel's wife," she said to her reflection, "and I do not know what to do with that." The reflection did not answer. Over the next weeks, she learned the rhythms of Barrington House as if it were a new kind of music. Henry rose early. She heard his steps in the corridor at dawn, the quiet murmur of his voice with the butler, the distant sound of hooves as he rode the estate boundaries. He returned for breakfast, clean and composed, with mud on his boots, but not a hair out of place. At first she came down later, feeling strangely shy in her own dining room. The table always looked too large for three, with Charlotte chattering at one end and Henry hidden behind a newspaper at the other. "You manage the estate as if it were a regiment," Phoebe remarked halfway through the second week, breaking a long silence over toast. He looked up. "In my experience, muddle is more trouble to correct than it is to prevent." "And are you trying to prevent muddle in your marriage as well?" she asked lightly. "Very much so," he said. It was such an absurdly serious answer that she laughed. To her surprise, his mouth twitched. "You find me amusing," he said. "Occasionally," she replied. "It is a great shock to us both." He returned to his paper, but his eyes looked a little less grim. Days fell into a pattern. Henry spent mornings with his steward and tenants, walked the fields, wrote letters to former comrades. Phoebe explored the gardens, the village, the attics. The library became her refuge, rows of books, dust motes in the sun, the soft hush that always soothed something in her. One morning she found Henry there unexpectedly, bent over a desk with an account book. She hesitated in the doorway. "Shall I come back later?" she asked. "No," he said. "You can hardly disturb columns of figures." His pen scratched on. She wandered to the shelves and ran her finger along a line of leather spines, histories, sermons, agriculture. Then, tucked away, travel journals, Italy, Greece, the Levant. Her fingers lingered on Italy. "You like those?" he asked, without looking up. "Yes," she said. "They make me feel as if the world is larger than drawing rooms and hedgerows." "You wish to travel," he said. "Desperately," she replied, then bit her tongue. It was a foolish thing for a newly married woman to confess. Wives were meant to wish for comfort, not danger. He only said, "I spent time in Italy on campaign. It rained more than the writers admit." "Do you miss it?" she asked. "The rain?" A hint of humour. "The campaigns." He paused. "I miss knowing exactly what was expected of me. Here everything is less clear." She heard what he did not say, that a wife was less predictable than a set of orders. "Perhaps you will grow used to uncertainty," she said. "I have lived my entire life in it." He gave her a look she could not quite interpret, then said, "If you would like, we might read that volume together in the evenings. You may see if the author lies about the weather." She stared. "You would read aloud? To me?" He shifted, almost sheepish. "It seems a harmless occupation." No one had read to her since she was a child. "I should like that," she said. That evening, he kept his promise. They sat opposite one another by the fire, the book between them. His voice was lower than she had noticed, his cadence steady. When the author waxed rhapsodic about sunsets, Henry snorted under his breath, and Phoebe had to angle her face away to hide a smile. It was nothing. It was everything. It was the first time their nights felt shared, even with the width of the room between their chairs. Still, the line remained. He left the room precisely when the clock chimed 10. He wished her good night at her door with perfect courtesy and disappeared into his own chamber. They were civil. They were polite. She began to feel as if she were living on a truce line, waiting for a battle that might never come. Chapter 3. The Storm and the Kiss. The first time something truly cracked between them, the sky did most of the work. It was a bright afternoon turned dark in a matter of minutes. Clouds rolled in over the fields, heavy and sullen. Phoebe watched from the drawing-room window as the wind began to thrash the trees. Charlotte, curled in an armchair with a novel, said, "I do love a storm, so long as I'm not in it." Phoebe smiled absently. Storms are honest. They do not pretend to be anything other than what they are. She wondered, not for the first time, what was happening inside Henry that he refused to name. He came in soon after, shoulders damp, hair ruffled by the wind. He spoke briefly with the butler, voice too low to catch, then joined them. "Tents collapsing?" Phoebe asked. "Nearly," he said. "We've secured most of the shutters, but the one above the front hall is loose. If the wind takes it, it may tear free entirely." Charlotte shivered. "That sounds dangerous." "It can be handled," Henry said. "You will both remain here, away from the windows." "Henry, we have stood near windows before," Phoebe said. "The wind is stronger than you think," he replied. "I have seen—" He broke off, his jaw clenched. Without finishing, he turned toward the door. Phoebe watched him go, unease prickling along her skin. He would climb out onto a ladder in that wind, she thought. Of course he would. Duty, obligation, one more thing to set straight. "He'll be careful," Charlotte said, reading her expression. "He always is." Phoebe tried to be reassured. The storm broke fully then, rain slashing sideways against the glass, thunder cracking overhead. Minutes ticked by. The thunder grew louder. A faint banging echoed faintly from somewhere near the roof. "That must be the shutter," Charlotte said. Phoebe's nerves tightened. Another sharp report sounded, louder this time. A curse answering it, barely audible and unmistakably Henry's. Phoebe shot to her feet. "Where are you going?" Charlotte asked. "To make sure your brother does not fall to his death because he insists on being heroic about woodwork," Phoebe said, gathering her skirts. "He told you to stay—" "He tells everyone to stay," Phoebe said. "Someone has to be idiotic enough to go." She ran down the corridor. The front hall was a chaos of gusting wind and wet stone. The main door stood half open, rain driving in. Just beyond, Henry was on the small outer ledge, wrestling with a flapping shutter that snapped and slammed like a living thing. "Henry!" she cried. He twisted his head. "What are you doing here? Get inside!" "Helping!" she shouted back. The wind caught her words and flung them around. "No," he said. "The ledge is slippery. If you fall, I shall be left with your orderly house and your annoying conscience on my own," she said. "Brace yourself. I'm holding the door." She planted her feet, gripped the edge of the door with both hands, and leaned her weight into it, trying to give him something stable to brace against. Rain soaked her within seconds. Her hair came loose from its pins, whipping around her face. The cold bit through her gown. She could feel the force of the wind through the wood. "Hold it," he called. "I am," she retorted. "Do your part or I shall never forgive you." He laughed, actually laughed, and fought the shutter back toward the frame. She heard the strain in his breath. He shoved it into place and slammed the bar across. The wind hit again, but the wood held. He stumbled back onto the threshold, rain streaming from his hair, chest heaving. "You should not have come out," he said, grabbing the door from her. He shut it with a thud, shutting out most of the noise. "I am not made of sugar," she said, trembling with cold and something she refused to call exhilaration. "I do not melt." "You could have slipped," he said fiercely. "That stone is treacherous when wet. If you had—" "If I had stayed put," she cut in, "and you had gone over that edge, I should have spent the rest of my life knowing I might have given you something to hold to and did not. I will not live like that." The hall felt suddenly very quiet compared to the storm outside. Rain tapped against the door. Water dripped from his hair, his shoulders, her gown, pooling at their feet. He was close. Closer than he had ever been without a crowd watching. The wet linen of his shirt clung to his chest. His eyes, usually so controlled, were bright. "You drive me mad," he said, voice low. Phoebe's heart stuttered. "So you have said." "This is not how it is meant to be done," he said, almost to himself. "What? Marriage?" she said, saving shutters, arguing in doorways. "Desire," he said. The word dropped between them like a spark into dry tinder. "Desire is not meant to be part of this," he went on, as if he hadn't spoken aloud. "We were meant to coexist, comfortably, respectably, with clear lines." Phoebe swallowed. "And now?" He looked at her in a way that stole her breath, as if he were finally seeing something he had been avoiding. "Now," he said, "I cannot stop thinking about you, and I do not know what to do with that." Her throat felt tight. "You are not the only one, you know." For a second he went very still. Then, slowly, as if against his own better judgment, he lifted a hand and brushed a wet curl away from her cheek. His fingers were warm despite the cold. "Phoebe," he said. And her name in his mouth was a different kind of touch. "Yes," she whispered. He bent his head and kissed her. She had imagined once or twice in unguarded moments what it might be like to kiss him. None of those imaginings matched the reality. His mouth was gentle at first, almost tentative, then surer as she rose onto her toes and slid her hands up to his shoulders. Everything else, the cold, the wet, the roar of the storm, fell away. Heat spread through her, a slow, dizzying bloom. She had never felt so solidly present in her own skin. When he finally drew back, they were both breathing hard. His hands rested at her waist. His thumbs moved almost unconsciously in small circles through the soaked fabric. "We should not have done that," he said, voice hoarse. Her heart plummeted. "I see. Another error in judgment." A flash of pain crossed his face. "Phoebe, do not begin to apologize for kissing your own wife," she said sharply. The humiliation rose swift and hot. "I will not endure being treated like a mistake." "I am trying to protect you," he said, "from expectations I may not be able to meet, from wanting too much and being disappointed." "Do you imagine I am so fragile?" she demanded. "I married you with my eyes open, Colonel Barrington. I knew precisely how much duty and how little poetry you contained. I do not need promises of sunsets. I need honesty." "This is my honesty," he said. "Desire is dangerous. It unsettles men. It makes them careless. I cannot afford carelessness, not with you." "You think wanting me is dangerous?" she said slowly. "Yes," he said. The words lodged in her chest like a stone. "Then perhaps you should put your walls back up," she said, fighting to keep her voice from shaking. "And I shall erect some of my own. That way we may both be perfectly safe." She stepped away before he could answer. The air between them felt jagged as she crossed the hall and climbed the stairs, wet skirts slapping at her ankles. In her chamber she shut the door and leaned against it, shaking. He had kissed her as if he cared. Then he had recoiled as if caring were the worst danger of all. She had always thought herself reckless with her heart. For the first time, she realized Henry might be more afraid of his than she had ever been of hers. Chapter 4. Learning the Language of Love. The days following the storm were worse than the days before it. Outwardly, nothing changed. They ate breakfast. They walked the grounds. They read Italy in the evenings, though more stiffly now. They spoke of weather and crops. They did not mention the kiss. Henry became strangely formal again, as if someone had wound him tighter. He left rooms as she entered them, with polite excuses. He studied maps and accounts with the determination of a man besieged. Phoebe tried to match him distance for distance. Pride kept her spine straight and her voice cool. If he wished for safety, she would give it to him, even if it meant feeling hollow every time he stepped back from her, as if proximity might burn him. Charlotte noticed, of course. "You are both acting like badly written characters in a dreadful novel," she said one afternoon when Henry left the library almost the instant Phoebe arrived. We are English, Phoebe said. We must suffer in silence. It is in the rules. Charlotte rolled her eyes. If you will not talk to him, I shall. You will do no such thing, Phoebe said sharply. I forbid it. So you do care, Charlotte said softly. Phoebe turned back to the window. That is not the point. I think it is exactly the point, Charlotte replied. You are both too stubborn to admit you are miserable. The words stuck in Phoebe's mind long after Charlotte left the room. Too stubborn, too proud, too afraid. She had never thought of herself as fearful. Yet here she was, skirting around her own husband because he had flinched from the one thing she had not been sensible enough to guard. One sleepless night, staring at the canopy of her bed, she admitted something to herself. Whatever safety this distance offered was worse than the risk of being hurt. She threw back the covers and swung her feet to the rug. The house lay quiet. Only a faint lamplight glowed under the door of Henry's study. Of course he was awake. He never seemed to rest fully, as if some inner watchman refused to stand down. She padded down the corridor and knocked. There was a pause, then the scrape of a chair. The door opened a fraction, then wider. Henry stood there in his shirt sleeves, waistcoat unbuttoned, ink smudged faintly on his fingers. His expression was startled. Phoebe, he said. Is something amiss? Yes, she said, stepping past him into the room before she could lose courage. Us. He closed the door slowly. That is, blunt. Bluntness has the advantage of being clear, she said, turning to face him. Her heart raced, but she kept her chin up. I am tired of skirting around you as if you are a stranger who happened to wander into my house. Our house, he said automatically. Very well, she conceded. Our house. It does not feel like ours. It feels like yours, and you are hosting me politely until I go away. I have no intention of going away. He looked at her for a long moment. No mask now, no witness. Just a man in a quiet room, lines of tension carved into his face. I have not known how to proceed, he said. And for once, there was no stiffness, only honesty. Then let us say things plainly, she replied. We were pushed into marriage. You offered me respect and security. I accepted. I did not expect to want more. Now I do. You kissed me. I kissed you back. You panicked. I sulked. We are now both unhappy. Did I miss anything? A flicker of reluctant amusement touched his eyes. That is a succinct summary. Thank you, she said. I wish next to understand why you seem to think desiring your own wife is a calamity. He moved away a little, as if he needed space to breathe. I told you. Wanting things clouds a man's judgment. She followed him with her gaze. You have spent years making decisions in war, she said. You think if you let yourself want anything for yourself, the whole structure will come down. Something like that, he admitted. And you do not trust yourself to want me, she said. He flinched just perceptibly. Phoebe went on more gently. Henry, have you considered that I am not a battle? You do not need to conquer or control me. You are the least controllable person I know, he said with feeling. Then perhaps, she said, you might stop trying and simply be honest with me. He looked down at his ink-stained hands. My experience of honesty is that it rarely serves a man well in society, he said. You are not talking to society, she replied. You are talking to your wife. I will not crush you with it. He lifted his eyes to hers. There was something raw there now, stripped of all his usual composure. You are not a duty to me, he said abruptly. The admission hung between them. I married you because it was right, he continued. I would do it again, even knowing everything that followed. You must understand that first. I do, she said quietly. I thought that would be enough, he went on. Respect, provision, order, a clear division between what was required and what was extra. His mouth twisted on that word. Then, you walked through this house as if you belonged, talked back to me at breakfast, insisted on holding a door against a storm, and I discovered that wanting you unsettles everything I have spent my life building. She felt her breath catch. He sounded not irritated, but bewildered, as if he were trying to articulate a language he had never been taught. Wanting is not a sin, she said softly. For some men, it might as well be, he said. Desire makes them careless. On campaign, that got men killed. At home, it ruins reputations. I swore, long before I met you, that I would not let my own impulses harm anyone. And you think loving me would harm me? She said, shaping the word he had not quite dared. He froze. She had not meant to say it. It came anyway, like truth often did. I do not know how to love properly, he said slowly. My father kept his affections buttoned tighter than his waistcoat. My mother loved society more than she loved anything else. The army rewarded obedience, not tenderness. All I know how to be is reliable. And you think I want something else, she guessed. You deserve something else, he said. Do not tell me what I deserve, she said gently. Tell me what you want. He looked at her as if she had asked him to step off a cliff. The silence stretched. The little clock on his desk ticked loudly. At last, his shoulders dropped, a small surrender. I want you, he said, voice low. Very much. More than I know what to do with. Heat swept through her, head to toe. That is a start, she managed. It is not just that, he added, words coming faster now, as if some barrier had cracked. I find myself listening for your footstep in the hall. I read something and think what you will say about it. When someone speaks sharply to you, I want to throttle them. When you laugh, I feel as if I have done something right without knowing what it was. That night in the storm, when you stepped out on that stone, I was more afraid than I was under fire. Do you understand? I can bear danger to myself. I do not know how to bear it for you. Tears prickled, hot at the back of her eyes. That sounds very much like love, she whispered. He shut his eyes briefly. If it is, he said, it is a kind I do not know how to manage. Love is not meant to be managed, she said. It is meant to be lived with. It bumps into the furniture and makes a mess of your schedules. He let out a short, surprised breath that might almost have been a laugh. You would say that? I would, she agreed. And I will say something else, Henry Barrington. I love you. His eyes flew open. She had not planned to say it tonight. She had only planned to demand answers. But the words had waited long enough. I love your ridiculous devotion to shutters, she went on, voice shaking. I love that you read harvest reports like battle plans. I love that you care more than you know how to express. I love that you offered me freedom when you could have claimed the opposite. I love you. And if you choose to remain behind your walls, I shall love you more loudly from outside them until the neighbours complain. He stared at her as if she'd handed him a loaded musket the wrong way around. Phoebe, he said, and there was more in his voice now than she had ever heard. Do you know what you are doing? Yes, she said. For once, I am choosing you. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to cup her face, careful again, so careful, as if she might break. I am not certain I deserve that, he said. I am not certain I care, she replied. Something in him finally let go. She felt it in the way he exhaled, in the way his thumb swept across her cheek as if to make sure she was real. I love you, he said. No hesitation, no qualifiers, just 4 simple words spoken like a vow. Relief rushed through her, wild and giddy. She laughed and cried at once, which rather ruined the moment, but he did not seem to mind. He kissed the tears from her cheeks, then her mouth, as if he had been waiting to do it properly. This kiss was different from the one in the storm. Still hungry, still dizzying, but without panic threaded through it. There was a new steadiness in it, a deliberate tenderness that shook her more than the urgency had. When at last they drew apart, she rested her forehead against his, catching her breath. "What now?" she whispered. "Now," he said softly. "We stop pretending we are here out of obligation and start behaving as if we chose this, as if we choose each other, every day." "I shall hold you to that," she said. "I expect nothing less," he replied. He reached for her hand. "Will you stay?" he asked, glancing toward his bedchamber door. "With me?" She thought of her blue room with its neat bed and empty hearth. She thought of all the lines they had drawn and redrawn. "Yes," she said, "I will." Spring came. The land around Barrington House brightened, fields greening, trees budding, birds shouting their opinions at dawn. Inside, the changes were quieter but no less real. Henry still rose early, still read his accounts, still inspected fences. But he came back to breakfast with a kiss for his wife's cheek instead of a nod. Phoebe found his coat left on chairs now and then, his carefully ordered life acquiring small, endearing signs of disarray. They argued. Of course they did. About tenants, about Charlotte's eagerness to ride too fast, about whether Phoebe truly needed to attend every village gathering. "You cannot save everyone," she told him one evening when he came in late, mud to his knees after helping repair a tenant's roof himself. "Perhaps not," he said, dropping into a chair. "But I can do my share of the work." "Then allow me to do mine," she said. "I'm quite good at listening to people tell me their woes. I have had years of practice with my mother's friends." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "Very well. We will call it a division of labour." Their quarrels now ended not in silence, but in compromise, or in laughter, or in kisses that made the argument seem unimportant compared to the fact that they were both stubborn and alive. Letters arrived from London. At first, invitations were cautious. Then, as gossip shifted to other topics and stories of the Colonel's agreeable new wife filtered back, they became more frequent. "We do not have to go," Henry said, holding an embossed card one day. "If you prefer to stay in the country, I shall not complain." "And let them think we are hiding in disgrace," she said, arching a brow. "No. We shall go to town. We shall attend Lady Rutledge's ball. We shall dance under her chandeliers and stand on her terrace and demonstrate that we are not the tragedy they hoped for." "You relish this," he observed. "Deeply," she said. He smiled. "Then we will go." London received them with the usual mix of curiosity and calculation. Phoebe stood at the top of Lady Rutledge's staircase on Henry's arm and felt oddly steady. She knew precisely who she was now. Not the Viscount's troublesome daughter, not the scandal in the roses, but Henry Barrington's wife, by duty and by choice. She heard the whispers as they descended. "That is Lady Phoebe." "Mrs. Barrington now, my dear. Do keep up." "I heard he married her in a rage of honour." "I heard they hide in the country and never see anyone." "They do not look as if they are hiding," someone else remarked. Henry's hand tightened around her arm in subtle support. She glanced at him. He looked almost amused. It struck her, suddenly, that she could not remember ever having seen him amused before their marriage. They danced the first set together. When another gentleman approached to claim her hand for the second, Henry hesitated, then bowed and stepped back. "Enjoy yourself," he murmured. "I shall endure the next 10 minutes somehow." She laughed and went, because she could. because it pleased her to look across the room and see him watching her with something warm in his eyes instead of grim duty. Later, Lady Rutledge cornered them near the terrace doors, her fan fluttering like a bird. "Colonel, Mrs. Barrington," she exclaimed, "how charming to see you both. You must tell me how you find married life in the country." "Peaceful," Phoebe said, letting mischief colour her tone, "when my husband is not throwing himself at broken shutters." Lady Rutledge blinked. Henry coughed. The conversation veered off into weather, thankfully. But as their hostess chattered, Phoebe caught two matrons watching them, not with pity this time, but with reluctant approval. Later still, as the night waned, Henry drew her onto the terrace. "Do you remember?" she asked, looking at the roses. "Rather vividly," he said. "If my father appears with a pistol again," she murmured, "I shall be very cross." He chuckled. "I shall shield you with my account book. It is thick enough." She turned to face him. The music from the ballroom floated softly through the open doors. The garden was much as it had been the night everything changed. Lanterns glowing, shadows gathering, roses breathing their sweet perfume. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "All of it." He seemed to consider the question. Then he cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin in that now familiar way that always made her chest ache pleasantly. "Yes," he said simply, without hesitation. She smiled. "Even the scandal?" "Especially the scandal," he replied. "It gave me you." "Oh," she said lightly, though her throat tightened. "I shall endeavour to cause you only the best possible scandals in future." "I would expect no less," he said. He kissed her then, openly, under the same sky that had witnessed their ruin. No one gasped. No one drew a curtain. Somewhere inside, someone laughed at a joke that had nothing to do with them. Phoebe closed her eyes and leaned into him, feeling the solidity of his arms around her, the steady beat of his heart under her palm. It had begun as duty, as reputation and appearances and all the brittle rules she had never fully believed in. The end. It had become desire, dangerous, disconcerting, and entirely theirs. And now, she thought as Henry rested his forehead against hers, it had settled into something richer. A life built not on fear, but on choice, on stubbornness and arguments and shutters and reading by the fire, on love that did not always know the right words but tried anyway. She had not chosen the scandal in the roses. She chose this. She chose him. And every time he reached for her hand, she chose him again. The end. Thank you, dear reader of the Regency Gazette, for joining us in another tale of love, intrigue, and whispered ballroom secrets. If today's romance delighted you, kindly bestow a like upon this video. It helps our Gazette reach more lovers of Regency storytelling. For weekly journeys into dukes, debutantes, scandals, and slow-burning devotion, please subscribe to the Gazette and tap the little bell so you are notified the moment the next story is published. Until our next edition, may your days be filled with grace and your nights with the promise of romance.